Guys, what's happening? Even Esh here, your boy, the host of the Iron Roots podcast, brought to you by Play. And in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about an author, ex-bodybuilder turned powerlifter who literally could run through a brick wall.
This is Play's Iron Roots,
A podcast dedicated to uncovering the strength legends, the training methods, and the stories around physical culture and iron history. I'm your host, Even Esh. Grab yourself a protein shake, chalk up, and prepare to travel back in time through some of the most awe-inspiring stories of iron history. It's go time. All right, guys, so who am I talking about? I'm talking about Anthony Ditillo Sr. And this is the book I'm telling you about, The Development of Muscular Bulk and Power. Now, inside this book, there's no copyright date as to when it was first written, so I did a little research on Google. So how accurate Google could be, we are still unsure at the moment, but it said 1971, which is 4 years before I was born. I was born in 1975. This book was certainly influenced from some of the previous episodes and the authors and lifters we've spoken about, very likely inspired by Bill Peanuts West, the originator, the original Westside Barbell creator out in Culver City, California. Now, this book, what really inspired me about it was a blend of mindset and training. The introduction to this book gives Anthony's background of how he got involved with bodybuilding, how he was so inspired to sculpt his body and have this great looking body. But he said the thing that turned the tides for him was he was waiting to train with a friend in his basement, which in the 70s, 80s, even the early 90s, this was a pretty common thing for teenagers to have some sort of a basement gym, oftentimes handed down to them from their dad, a real basic bench press setup with a barbell. And so while Anthony Ditillo was waiting for his buddy, his training partner, to show up, who was routinely late, he said, you know what? I'm just going to start training. And he begins with the bench press. And he talks about how his program was set for something like 10 to 12 reps, 5 sets. And by the third or fourth set, he's no longer achieving his 10 to 12 reps. He's now getting 8 reps, 7 reps. So he's struggling on this one set with the goal in mind that he must achieve the 10 reps, exactly what's programmed. Well, during the struggle, he almost dies to try to make the rep. He misses, and in his writing, he says the bar comes down and crashes his face and knocks out his teeth. And his main issue is not that he's injured his face or knocked out his teeth. He said the main issue is that he was angry at this time that he had spent doing these bodybuilding routines, but unfortunately, he was not strong. He had nothing to truly show for it. He was essentially all show and no go. So he started doing research on the men who were truly strong. And the two guys that really inspired him were Paul Anderson and Doug Hepburn. And we'll be featuring them probably in future episodes of Iron Roots, but you could find them, their older videos on YouTube, seeing them competing and weightlifting and doing strongman events. And the way this book starts to kind of evolve is Anthony starts talking about how training for strength and training for power is really the key to athleticism. It is the key to having a strong mindset. And he mentions something about having an iron will, and it made me wonder if he read this book, An Iron Will by Orson Swett Marden. I had actually found out about this book by The Ultimate Warrior. I used to be friends with The Ultimate Warrior before he passed away, and I remember asking Warrior Man what books does he love to read. And he said, oh, I love reading books by Orson Swett Marden, An Iron Will. This book is a short read, and even though I digress, a lot of what's introduced in the beginning of this book talks about mindset, about how you must get your mind in this state to prepare yourself for hard training, for heavy training. He also spoke about the confidence you start to get through strength training. And in the beginning of the book, he gets into the athletic / strength and conditioning components of strength, which is something that we did not hear about in the early 70s. I've said that several times before, that in the 70s, sport coaches were still very against weight training. They would say that if you stop weightlifting, your muscles will turn to fat, or if you are weight training, it will stunt your growth, or you will become muscle bound. You'll lose speed, you'll lose flexibility. And here's what he talks about in his experience. And by the way, Anthony is a Jersey guy. He grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is about 20 minutes from the original underground strength gym. So he talks about what makes a successful athlete. He goes, well, for one thing, a successful athlete must be a man of extreme self-confidence. He must possess an iron will. And that's what Anthony loved about heavy lifting, is it gave him a newfound confidence that he could apply towards life. But he also realized that as an athlete in high school, lack of strength created a lack of confidence or created self-doubt. So here he says that the strong athlete cannot possibly allow himself the usual liberties that the common man is allowed. And I oftentimes speak about being the uncommon man, not doing what normal people do, whether it's training normal, eating normal, living normal, because normal equals average. He says, no, he is an athlete. He is different. He is a man amongst men. He is superior. And because of his superiority, he must not allow himself to sink into the daily habits of average, normal men. And just like reading that right there fires me up. Here's where he gets more into how strength is the number one component for athleticism. Now, I'm not saying that I completely agree with that. The answer to that would be, it depends. It depends on what kind of athlete it is. But I'll tell you this, strength builds confidence. Strength transforms people. There's something unique that happens when somebody's getting strong and putting on size compared to when I'm doing quote unquote speed training. So check this out. Here's where he continues to talk about the athletic components of strength. Physical strength is the prime mover, so to speak, in an athletic body. The greats of the greats to be had that magnificent fortitude which enabled them to continue on and on and on when the going got rough. They had that quality which is called internal strength. This is what the grit of champions is made of: complete mental, physical, and spiritual accord, true athletic strength. And then as you go to read on to the book, he talks about how his basketball coach messed up in training them for sports. And it's interesting because here we are, almost 50 years later, and I'm still hearing some of these mistakes being made. So check this out. He's talking about where he was a basketball player. He goes, if strength is so important for athletic conditioning, why do so many coaches avoid it when training their men? Well, for the most part, it is a case of ignorance and lack of initiative on their part of the various coaches who see a need for such training, but are not willing to part from the old ways to experiment in new types of training. And I'll tell you, I've worked with athletes who were power athletes, let's say a shot putter, but he had to go and do a 5K warm-up every day, going and jogging 3 miles because that's how we're warming up for track and field. The next thing he says, he's questioning why his basketball coach did not have them doing things like, why did he not have us run around the track with weighted shoes to enable us to run longer and faster when those weighted boots came off? And he speaks about training against or competing against a rival high school in basketball. And he said, we just could not steal the ball from them. If we went to get a rebound, their greater physicality they would bump into us and we would, rebound off of them. So he talks about how experiences in being weak are what caused him to be so fired up as the need to be strong. And as we're going through this, those of you that are listening to it, I want you to make sure you watch the video because we're going to be putting photos of Anthony Ditillo into the video, as we do with all of the Iron Roots videos, and you're going to see that this guy was built like a tank. I mean, it looks like if he wanted to run through a brick wall, he could. His traps, somebody told me as a joke, and I believed him. He said he had those traps sewn into his upper back. I said, no way. He was just kidding. So I want to finish with this, how he's kind of against the fads and gimmicks, which is something I stand for. He says, what about you fellas who perform some of the craziest types of movements I have ever seen or heard about in weird gyrations in order for you to complementally work your arms? Why are you doing all those concentration curls? What size do you think you are going to give your biceps? Can't you see that the lightness of the dumbbell will prohibit any possible great muscle size from coming your way? And when you look through the back of this book, when he starts getting into the different workouts, whether it's a specialty program for the arms, the chest, or the back, he goes through this kind of common method of using what I've heard to be called the 3 to 5 method, where it's 3 to 5 exercises, 3 to 5 sets, and 3 to 5 reps. So he wasn't into doing supersets. He wasn't into doing circuit training. He was into lifting heavy barbells, period. And a big part of his heavy barbell lifting was power rack training, which we'll get into in another episode of Iron Roots. So when you look through these programs, they're high volume, they're high intensity, heavy weights, lots of work. And he also talks about something that I really didn't agree with fully, but he says if you really want to be a champion, you're not just going to be able to lift for 3 days a week. You're going to have to lift for 4 days a week. Your training's going to have to be at least an hour and a half. Now, I could see why his workouts took that long. He's doing one exercise, no supersetting. He's just talking about training to be a tank, training to be a brick house. And in the programming, you'll see some of the specialty programs. He's going to encourage sets of 5 to 7 reps, sets of 10 to 12 reps. But for the most part, he hovered around that 5x5 method, which we've spoken about before, which has been so powerful because it's that blend of strength and size. And of course, when he talks about nutrition in here, he prefaces everything with saying, listen, I am no nutrition expert, but he talks about the basic nutrition advice that is commonly given in those old magazines of the 50s and 60s, which is lots of meats, lots of fruits and veggies, fish, milk, cheese, and kind of having this high protein, high fat, moderate carbohydrate diet. This book, to me, when I think of this book, who should be having it? I think about kids who are lacking in confidence. And my buddy John Wellborn and I had this conversation. We said, look, you want to stop kids from getting bullied? Put 30 pounds of muscle on them. And I hate to break it to you, if they're going through, a million of these YouTube videos trying to find the secrets, it's in these old books. Heavy lifting, 5x5 methods, drinking lots of milk, and working hard. As I like to say, it's so simple, it's complicated. So there you have it, guys. This is just one of the books written by Anthony Ditillo. He's got a second book written out there. You could find them probably on eBay. There's some websites selling these that probably picked up the rights to reprint these. And what's also pretty interesting is when I first opened the Underground Strength Gym, the first warehouse in 2007, Anthony Ditillo Jr. was lifting at the gym next door to me, and he came by to introduce himself. And when he mentioned his last name, I said, oh, I've read articles by your dad. And I remember seeing little ads in the back of those old school muscle mags by Anthony Ditillo on you could mail in for something like $2 or $5 to get these special workout programs. It was the early days of him selling one-on-one programming through mail order. So that's it, guys, for this episode of the Iron Roots podcast brought to you by Play. Make sure you head on over to play.pro to catch all the past episodes, plae.pro. And inside play.pro is basically a treasure trove of strength and conditioning, sports performance. It's all of the play labs that are recorded. It's basically a one-stop shop for anybody who wants to get stronger, faster, tougher, more athletic, and better looking. That's it for this episode of Iron Roots, guys. I'll see you next time.